Right. Well, thank you, Russ. You said very kind things. Since I had the mic for 50 minutes, I'm more concerned about the end when you get back up. So I'm really excited about tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. I joked a little bit before this. We're going to talk jurisprudence and ethics and cosmology and a little theoretical physics and mathematics and only glance at all of those. So don't worry. But this is going to be good. So tonight, as you can see, the topic is the cosmological argument and the moral code. Both of these point to the fact that there is God, and we're going to have a good time exploring them. We have a lot of slides to go through, so I promised my wife I would try to speak slowly, which is not my nature. So feel free to, like Peyton Manning, give me the signal. We're calming down. All right, let's go. Okay, we're going to begin with two verses. One is out of Proverbs. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. The second is seek and you will find. Both of these are really important, obviously, because the second one is a promise. If you seek, you will find. It's a promise of God. The first one is interesting. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. There's effort on our part, right? And we think of the verse, for example, where it talks about the man who found the treasure buried in a field, and he sold everything he had to go find it. That's the kind of effort that's expected of us in our life, right? As our ministry to the Lord, as our relationship with the Lord is to sell everything. When we come and dabble with it just a little bit, obviously to use that word particularly, if we come and dabble with it just a little bit, it's no promise we're going to find. If you seek with your heart, you will find. So, as we go, perfect. All right, I'm going to have some ground rules. We're going to go through a few minutes of ground rules on this. One, the goal tonight's not to eliminate all doubt, but to eliminate reason. I'll talk a little bit more about proof. As Russ mentioned, I did spend some time doing trial work, and so that's a big part of my life. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But one thing I love is this quote from William Lane Craig, and it says, one goal of apologetics is to raise, or as I like to say, to reveal, the high intellectual price tag of non-belief. One of the things that's out there, and it's, if anything, it's props to the marketing department for those that are not Christians, is how much effort and pressure it seems it's applied to those that are not believers. How much it feels like you have to be standing just on faith. You have to check your mind at the door and come and stand over here if you want to be a believer. Sorry, I just lost the video, didn't I? And come and step off to the side if you want to be a believer. And that reason and rationale are over here in a different field. There's nothing further from the truth. That is a ploy. It's a marketing scheme, if you will. It's propaganda. It's not real. Now, that may be well-intended. It may be well said with a fine heart, but it's not actual. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go. By the way, one part to that, too, it's something that goes all the way back to the garden. Did God really say? From the very beginning, we were challenged. Did God really say? Is God really real? Is that true? And you have to think of it from Adam and Eve's perspective. We don't know chronologically how long it had been, but God himself had told them, almost face to face, right? You should not eat of this tree. But did God really say? It's a powerful thing for us. Okay, you'll see this image a few times tonight. This is actually what I believe we're going to be able to show, and what the world is doing with much of its beliefs is they're hanging on by a cliff. Okay? All right, we're going to start with a little story of St. Boniface. How many have actually heard of St. Boniface before? Impressive. So St. Boniface lived around the 6th and 7th century, or 7th and 8th. About 13 years after his death, a contemporary by the name of Williband wrote up an account of what he was associated with. He was a missionary to the Hessians, which are the Germans at the time, and he was successful. They had many converts. But one of the things that was still going on where there was a mix of paganism and Christianity. And one in particular was a tree. It was a great oak, beautiful tree. In fact, that's what's depicted, although it's kind of small. But it's a great oak, a beautiful tree. And it was called the Oak of Thunder, or as we'll see from the story, the Oak of Jupiter or the Oak of Thor. And it was worshipped. And they used a number of different things, divination and other stuff, as a part of their pagan practices. And pleading and trying to worship this tree in order to get security and other things from it was a part of it. And here's the account that was written contemporary with the time. With the counsel and advice of the latter persons, Boniface, in their presence, attempted to cut down at the place called Gashmir a certain oak of extraordinary size, called in the old tongue of the pagans the Oak of Jupiter or Thor. Taking his courage in his hands, for a great crowd of pagans stood by watching and bitterly cursing in their hearts, the enemy of the gods, he cut the first notch. But when he had made a superficial cut, suddenly the oak's vast bulk, shaken by a mighty blast of wind above, crashed to the ground, shivering its topmost branches into fragments in its fall. The reason I read that is I feel as though some of what happens with our front, particularly the assault that happens to you, you have to check your reason, you have to check your mind at the door. It feels a little bit like this mighty oak. It's something that the population, the society, the pressure around you is, you should believe this, you should believe this, you should believe this. But what I'll tell you is that with a little bit of examination, sometimes it doesn't take much, but a little, and you find out that what was behind what otherwise looked like a very strong and defendable position was rotten. So, and actually, I want to add one more part to this. We know that from the command, we're to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts, all of our soul, and all of our mind, right? Okay. All right, another thing that Professor William Lane Craig is, we'll refer to him a number of times. He's a philosopher and theologian, and he's the one who's responsible for the cosmological argument that we're going to examine. He talks about, we should be ready at any point in time to give a defense of the gospel. That's also scriptural. He actually says, and he notes, you should be able to explain, because you have good grounds to do so, what it is that why we have anything at all, what was the beginning of the universe, fine-tuning, which is something Russ is going to speak to in another session, objective moral values and duties, where they come from, and the historical facts concerning Christ. We have great ground to speak to all of these. All right, last few little bits of ground rules. Science. A couple of things about science. Science is fantastic. This is not anti-science in the least. Science is a tool given by God for us to observe facts and to apply them to theories, right? So that we can understand the world that's around us. One of the things, though, you have to be careful about is that, and we know why this happened, but particularly in modern science, Del Tackett is a teacher and a worldview expert. Many of them know. I actually got to know him at Focus on the Family years ago. Got to study under worldview classes. But he talks about the universe, the observable universe, nature is almost like a box, right? And what happens with modern science is we often will look at that and say the answer has to be inside this box. There can be no explanation outside this box that works. It has to be nature. And there's a reason why that came about. For a long time, we looked at things that could be rationally decided and rationally understood, and instead we assumed, because we didn't understand them right off the bat, as being supernatural. It's called God in the gaps. And what happened is they said, because you assumed God was in a gap that we could explain rationally, we now assume God can never be in the gap. Well, those two things are also logically incoherent. You can still have supernatural even if it wasn't where you found it. So one of the problems is when you look at a box and you say, when you walk in fact, we'll use a table instead. If you walk in and say, I'm going to follow the evidence wherever it leads, so long as it doesn't lead to here, you've already removed a point of truth where it could go, right? Okay, logic. So I only mention this just because these are some of the things that we run into out there in the world. There are certain parts in philosophy in particular, there can be an idea of deconstructionism. And if you're not familiar with it, it's actually another good tool that should be used. It's sort of the why. How come you think that? Why would you think that? It can, like anything, be taken to extremes. So you can get to a point where, prove to me that you exist. JJ, prove to me you're in the room, right? You can get to the point, I just pick on JJ because I've known him for a while. Prove to me you're here. You can get to the point where you start to question whether the words I'm speaking are even being heard in the same way that I'm speaking, and whether you're even here, whether I'm even here, whether your car's out in the front. You can get to extremes. That's not the realm we're playing in. I believe the Lord made certain things self-evident, and if we're going to have a conversation, there are certain grounds known as common sense that we have to begin with. One of those laws being non-contradiction. Also, language is really important. You'll see this a little bit later too. If I hold out my hand and we use the common vernacular and I say, I have nothing in my hand, well, in common parlance, that's true, but I actually have air is in my hand. I have particles on the surface of my hand. I may have lunch, even though I washed really well in my hand. I've got stuff in my hand. It's not nothing. It's not ex nihilo, as you might say from Latin, right? There is still, that'd be from something, but it's not nothing in there, right? There's still something. The last bullet is really important because this is also a very common problem that we have in our common society. We see this everywhere, from politics to law to science to everything, which is appeal to authority, which is a fallacy. It is good that we have individuals that are experts in their fields and that dedicate their time and their resources to go and become the very best there is in that. That is absolutely great, and we should listen carefully to what they have to say because they've spent that kind of time. It is not the same thing, though, as to simply say, so-and-so expert said. What we're supposed to do is go and learn from that, and they can present the evidence. And in fact, when someone understands something really well, they should be able to present it both concisely and eloquently and in a way that we can all understand. And we think that, by the way, because the universe around us was designed. Not my topic for tonight, but we'll move on. Last thing is, and I couldn't help but put a courtroom up there, the idea of proof. Only in mathematics can you actually get to something that's an absolute proof. That's the only science where you can actually get to absolutes. Every other science, what you really do ultimately is you take a concept and you check it against your observations and your data, right? So the most classic example, even though we don't really understand the law of gravity, is you check it, right? You constantly check it, as I check the mic for its usefulness. Perfect. You constantly check it, right? And you say, it's going to work here. And you go out in the parking lot, it's going to work there. And you go up on top of a mountain, it's going to work here. And you learn, you observe all the different ways, and you have a theory of what gravity is going to do to the object, right? And then you check it and check it and check it. You won't understand why necessarily, but you'll understand how and what. I say all that because anytime you're proving anything within, whether it's theoretical physics or others, what you're using is reason. What is most likely? What makes sense? What is rational? You are not going to be able to prove something beyond something that's absurd. So, for example, when I was a trial attorney and we were doing cases, I had to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. What I didn't have to do is prove something with absolute certainty. And what I would mean by that is if you had a case where, and we'll keep this really clean, someone read a red light. I have no idea why we're at trial, but they did it. And they ran this red light, and we're going to put them in front of a jury. And we have 100 witnesses, we have satellite data, and we've got every camera you can imagine, and the person, whatever, we have all the bits of evidence you can think of. For some reason, we have DNA evidence on this red light. And at the same time, the person says, no, my defense is that I phased out of existence when the car was coming supposedly to a stop and phased back out on the other side. I don't have to prove against that, right? You get to a point where you're into absurdity, and that's what we're going to even see some tonight. Okay, so let's begin. The Kalam cosmological argument, which I'll refer to sometimes as KCA, sometimes as the cosmological argument, is one of the things we're going to focus on. But I want to begin with this, Genesis 1:1, because what Kalam is going to point to is the concept of you can understand logically that there was a cause in the universe, right? We know scripturally what that cause was. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I will say this, there are other cosmological arguments, so if you get excited about this, everybody has different things that they love. If you get excited and you decide to go Google on YouTube or do a search on YouTube, cosmological argument, you may find the Thomist argument from Thomas Aquinas. You may find the Leibnizian argument. We'll go with that one by Gottfried Leibniz. You may find the one we're going to focus on, the Kalam argument. You may find others. Okay, great. They're all interesting. We're going to focus on Professor Craig's argument tonight, both because it's concise and also because I believe it's really powerful. By the way, Kalam is an Arabic term. It means scholastic. And what Craig did when he was doing his work many years ago, starting to really drive this with popularity, is he looked back at some of the Islamic medieval thinkers from the Middle Ages who had done a lot of work on, hey, logically, you can demonstrate there's God. All right. So in a nutshell, the Kalam argument is going to be talking about how you can't get something from nothing, and therefore something caused the thing that we have, because as I like to coin it with a little more southern flair, even a child knows that you can't get something from nothing, but we sure do have a whole lot of something, which means wherever we came from, it wasn't nothing. All right, another foundational piece is, from an option standpoint, the universe is going to have two options, and this may seem so plain, and I apologize to some of you as we go through this. Everybody scratches their head and goes, this is really common sense. But this is necessary for foundation. There's going to be two options. You're going to have a universe that's always existed, or you're going to have a universe that came into being. The law of non-contradiction says there's really not another option, right? All right, and the goal with the KCA, the goal is not to say that the God of the Bible is the God that was the cause. That's not what this proof does. There's other evidence for that. What the goal of the KCA is to prove is that you're going to have a cause, and that cause, by inference, is going to have certain features to it as an agent. It's going to have to be timeless. It's going to have to be uncaused by the very definition. It's going to have to be powerful. It's going to have to be immutable, which means it's not changing. And it's going to have to be personal, and we'll talk about why that is. Obviously, all of those characteristics fit very well with Genesis 1:1, but it doesn't by itself draw that direct line. It just narrows the field to being something like it. Okay, now we're here. This is the Kalam argument. It's a syllogism, which is a tool that's used by logic. And what this says, so explaining P1, P2, and C1, right? P1, P stands for premise, C stands for conclusion. And so the way a syllogism is going to work, and many of us are familiar with this, but if P1 and P2 are both true, then C1 must be true. That's how a syllogism is going to work, right? So we'll read it. P1, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. And we have to play that out and tease it out. Is that true? P2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, if both of those are true, the conclusion must be true, which is therefore the universe had a cause. Now, when you look at a syllogism, you're going to do a couple things. One, you're going to check to see if it's valid. Is it true logically and consistently that if you have P1 true and P2 true, that C must follow? In this case, that's not challenged. That's something that the world accepts, right? This is a true, valid syllogism. The second part you check is soundness, and that's where we'll spend our time for this argument. And soundness is going to be, is P1 actually true? Is P2 actually true? If they are, logically, you have a cause, and we need to think about what that looks like. So for P1, and I like to keep P1 here on the screen just so we don't lose it. P1, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Now, for most people, that's a pretty reasonable statement. It's not going to be much of a question. It seems self-evident. Everything we've ever known everywhere that exists has a cause. Whether it's your car, which you can trace back to what the cause was, whether it's you, which you could trace back to the cause, whatever it is, we can trace back to a cause. The question then, for some that try to challenge this one, and again, not many do challenge P1, they mostly spend their time on P2, but where they do is some may challenge it with what's known as the fallacy of composition. So the fallacy of composition is the idea that something, just because the parts of something act a certain way, doesn't mean the whole of something acts that way. I won't spend a ton of time here, but I will say this. That gets into properties. You have emergent properties and additive properties. Please just stay with me for a few seconds. I won't stay here long. You have emergent properties and additive properties. Emergent properties are going to be where the whole thing acts different than the parts. And additive properties are going to be every bit of the parts are the same. They have the same characteristic, and they act like the whole. With this, when you look at the universe, one of the things you would expect to find if it was an additive property is that everywhere you look in the universe, it would be the same. However you sliced it, whether you sliced a little bitty piece of the universe or whether you sliced 99.9% of the universe, you would expect it to act the same way, that everything in there requires a cause for it to exist. And that's what we find. So the burden here is for those that are trying to say that the universe should have some type of emergent property, would have to demonstrate that. The second thing is, the minute they start going down the emergent road, again, I won't stay here long, but the minute they start going down the emergent road, they very quickly get into something that is not following the laws of nature within our box and is otherwise supernatural. So, we skipped one. Okay, this one's also fun. Here's another thing that you see as an attack on P1. Philosophers David Hume and Bertrand Russell said that no cause is needed, and as support for that, they use this. This is not a straw man, guys. These are quotes that are still coming up in these debates. Bertrand Russell said back in 1948 in the BBC interview, "I should say that the universe is just there, and that is all." It's a little bit of throwing your hands up and is saying, stop asking me these questions. I know you're trying to point to God, but if anything, it starts to make you question, what's the motivation behind that? And we're going to end with a little bit of that motivation. What's actually driving you to be so obstinate as to not be willing to see where this is leading, to say, nope, I don't need to answer cause and effect. In fact, human so far as to say, I don't even believe in cause and effect anymore. To try, I believe in part, to avoid this very problem. If they're honest with themselves, they start to see that it's pointing to this, which is why it's not you who's standing on the edge, but it's these guys. You're not the one with the house built on the sand, even though they may come with tremendous jargon and these are very sharp guys. There's nothing about that that's not true. Very intellectual, dictionary-like vocabulary. It takes a while to unpack, but it doesn't mean they're not still hanging on the cliff. All right, so let's look at P2. The universe began to exist. Legitimate place to question, right? So a couple common things. One is that the universe is infinite. And there's a number of different ways that we tried to go about that scientifically. How could the universe be infinite? And what you do remember with science is you want to take your theory, you want to apply it to what your observations of data are. And we had a number of different theories that we used. Everybody is familiar, I think, now with the Big Bang Theory, and we'll mention that here in a bit. But before it, there were things like the steady state or static theory, right? There were things, oscillating came after the Big Bang, but there were things infinite size, which is still a postulation by some. And with the steady state, in fact, Einstein held on to the steady state for a long time. He even used a thing called the Cosmological constant and held on to it after a Belgian priest pointed out to him the very proposition of the Big Bang. And so, although Einstein ended up being wrong on that. But what we know when we look at the evidence is you have things like cosmological background radiation, you have expansion of the universe, and despite the most recent headlines from James Webb, none of that has changed. It's nice clickbait, but none of that has changed. And so what you still have is you still see the same thing of a universe that goes to a single point and that was expanding out. Now, what is more concerning, though, with the idea that the universe is infinite is that inside that box is a little problem with time. And this is also another abstract idea, but if you have an infinity of time, we can conceptually get an idea of an infinity that goes, let's see which way it would be for you guys if it were on a line. That way? Yeah. If you have an infinity that's going to the future, right, we can conceptually get that. That's eternity. We think about that as heaven. We understand. We started here and we just go forever that way. But when you have an infinity inside reality, you can have it mathematically, but when you have an infinity inside reality, that goes forever into the past, and you expect time to chronologically traverse that distance, you will never get here. Now, conceptually, that's funny, right? But that has that problem. You have what's called an actual infinity. Not a potential infinity, an actual infinity. An actual infinity from forever past can never get us to here, philosophically. And so you will never be able to have an infinite universe inside this box. You would be dependent upon a timeless cause outside of this space. So as much as they tried, it still wouldn't matter. Philosophically, it wouldn't make any sense. It would be absurd. You'd be hanging on to the cliff. Now, the second thing they've done is they've gotten to a point where, and this is something that's been proposed by Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Hawking most recently, the late Professor Hawking most recently in his book, The Grand Design, talked about this, where it was a big pronouncement. We've discovered in science that you can get something from nothing. In fact, I'll read this. Let me find his quote. So he says in his book, the crux of it, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Because there is something, the universe will create itself from nothing. Now, the reality is it was more than the law of gravity that was needed. It was energy and other things with it. But this is one of the sleight of hands that happens, and I don't think that sleight of hand necessarily is intentional. I actually think there's a heart. Romans talks about it. You can suppress it with your heart. You can suppress the truth. And I think what happens is even if it's unknown to some of the proponents, there can be a desire, right, for this to be true. And we'll talk about with Lewis why that is at the end. And it has to do with one day being accountable for things. But even more, when you look at with Hawking and with others, because there is something, you can get something from nothing, which doesn't make any logical sense, right? These are brilliant guys. There's nothing to take away from them. All right. Did we skip 2? Nope. Okay, good. Another common argument is something outside of the universe made the universe. Okay. When you look into string theory, you can get the multiverse, you can get other stuff. Here's the question about those things. Is multiverse, in your mind, timeless, uncaused, immutable? It starts to sound a lot like heaven or something supernatural. If it stays just like us, and it's the natural, and it's just an extension of the natural world, all you've done is move the point in time from here back further, but you still have the same question. And no matter how far you go back, until you've answered the question of what caused a thing that requires a cause, you have the problem of the crane theory. You just keep trying to lift the thing you tried to lift before with the same sort of problem. So when you've got this, and Aliens in the Multiverse, I put Aliens up there because Richard Dawkins, who's a very famous atheist and proponent and does a lot of debates, when he was on a film, Expelled, a film Expelled with Ben Stein, and he gave an explanation. I won't steal too much in case you want to go with any of this next time, but he gave an explanation when he was pushed. What started the universe? And he said fairly, we don't really know. But what was it? He goes, well, it wasn't God. What was it? Well, maybe it was aliens. And the reason he needed that is because there's so much evidence of, I'm just teasing your design. There's so much evidence of design that you needed something. And so he needed to have some way to point to what was going on. Now, what happens eventually is you get to this, which is starting to shift a little bit more from an attack so much on P1 and P2, and is instead to an attack on the answer that we give. So the first one is, if everything needs a creator, who created God? And that's a great question, right? The problem is it's a definitional shift. We just said you can't create from within the box. You need something outside the box. You need supernatural in order for this to work, right? And yet what they did is they said, but what if your God is inside this box? What created him? But he's not inside the box. God is outside the box. By definition, he is timeless. By definition, he is supernatural. Now, theologically, I'll say timeless at least at some point. We won't chase that very far. So, as for the next one, and I don't personally think God would have made it like this. Exactly. Behind this one, though, is one of the harder questions that people raise, because this goes to the depth of our hearts, right? I'm hurt. I'm suffering. Life is real. And this is really where the conversation often ends up going. Someone is upset with God or angry with God or angry at life or any number of different things because it's a real hurt. And this is one where, by the grace of God, we can reach into their hearts and speak to them, right? Because there is only one answer for this that's going to satisfy. But either way, all of these are hanging on by the cliff. And I will say with, there was one I think I missed it. Oh, I did miss this. Okay. The second bullet here is, we don't know yet, but when we find it, it will be natural. This is not a quote, but this is a paraphrase of one of the finer thinkers in atheism today. He gave an extraordinary explanation of quantum mechanics. He did a lot of jargon, a lot of really fine-sounding things, and in the end, when pushed, he came to this. And I think this starts to reveal the heart, right, behind it. But what I keep trying to caution is when you have the conversations, and if you have a conversation with a neighbor, or you're at the coffee house, or you find yourself needing to give a defense for the gospel, you are on solid ground. This is not shaky. Those that are up against you are on shaky ground with things like this. When you actually peel back a lot of what the arguments are, and you can get past all of the bluff and all of the bluster, you end up with stuff like this. We don't know, but it's not God. All right, so arguments 4. Some of the things. Science obviously is following what God has already told us. It's not going to lead us, but at the same time, we can love the Lord with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our mind. And one of the things we find, that the gentleman who proposed first the Big Bang Theory, as I mentioned before, was Georges Lemaitre. He was a Belgian priest, and he also was a theoretical physicist and a mathematician. He proposed the Big Bang Theory, and it was pushed against in part because you need a static state for it to be eternal, even though that had a problem with acute infinity. But the Big Bang Theory, if you're not familiar, of course, is that everything came from a singular point and expanded out, and that the expansion is continuing at a rate that it will not collide back again. Right? Oscillating theory, which was another attempt at doing eternal, was the idea that it was a singular point. It expanded out. At some point, like a magnet or gravity, it will come back down to a singular point, and almost like a heartbeat will keep going. You would still have the problem with acute infinity, or actual infinity, but either way, it's not what the science shows. Okay, next one is, we talked about infinity. Second law of thermodynamics. We're not going to dive too deeply into this either, but the understanding is entropy. Things go from order to chaos. That's the natural flow of things. And what you watch is you watch the universe, as you might watch your garden, is that if you don't apply additional effort into your garden, it does not grow you a fine crop. It will grow you a lot of weeds. In the same way, the universe will go from order eventually to disorder. In fact, the theories, and they're just theories, we don't know, is that the way this would end, absent the intervention of the king coming back here at some point, would be, theories would be Big Rip, which is the universe ends up splitting into the smallest of smallest fragments, or Big Freeze, where all of the energy is finally run out and the last star dwindles and the last black hole goes away, right? Okay, so as a summary, these are generally some of the best arguments that the atheists provide to the Kalam cosmological argument, and that is you can get something from nothing. It's there or always has. It's just there or always has been. It was aliens or the multiverse. We haven't found it yet, but the answer is not God. And I had to use a little southern there. The answer ain't God. So inference. The cosmological argument inferences are this. One, it concludes that you're going to have a powerful agent that created the universe. You have to have something that's outside that box to create it. That thing has to be powerful. I can't create a universe, so it's got to be pretty powerful, right? Second, it needs to be uncaused by definition, or you used to have the same problem, what caused the caused thing, right? Third, it needs to be timeless. That's the only way you get around the problem of the infinite past, right? The third, or at least it had to be timeless before time was created. The third is it needs to be immutable. That comes with timelessness. And the fourth is personal. Why personal? William Lane Craig says, the cause is a personal agent endowed with free will because free will can initiate new effects without antecedent determining conditions. Okay, that explains it. So he has to be a lot more careful than I do because he's going to have folks that are going to be precise with each word. Think of like a domino effect, right? If you have an infinite chain of dominoes and one starts, nothing else needs to interfere. The dominoes are all going to fall in order. The problem with that, again, comes back to the problem of infinity. If you have even a timeless actor that always has everything necessary to get the thing started, it would have started an infinite time ago. You need an actor to say, I need to start it now. We're going to have it happen right now. The fact that we get to present is because there was a choice to do it now. Right? All right, Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. All right, we're going to shift to the second one, the need for a lawgiver. All right, so this is going to be a little more of a natural law argument. So the question posed with this is, where do morals come from? Do I not steal from you because I don't want you to steal from me? Is that the real reason I do that? That's social contract theory, right? Social contract theory goes back to the philosophical idea that at some point, the natural state of man was all of us holding guns to each other's heads, or whatever they had back then, and saying, I'll put this down, like some kind of strange gangster movie, I'll put this down, so long as we all agree to hold each other accountable, to not murder each other, to not steal from each other, and to not lie from each other, in any other way that might harm me, right? Social contract theory. The other idea, which is the one that I'm going to propose, is that it's one that's written on our hearts. That we have a moral code of not to steal and not to murder and not to lie, not to do all these terrible things, because there was a God who said not to steal and not to murder and not to lie. And that it's objective beyond our own desire not to be harmed. That is something that's imposed upon us, which is why, by the way, we feel it so strongly in our conscience. Not nurture, but human nature. Nature, as Lewis called it, human nature given to us by God. The laws of nature and nature's God, right? So, let me find where I am here. All right. C.S. Lewis said, and he's got a great book, by the way, called Mere Christianity, where he spends a little bit of time on this. If you don't prefer to read it, he did a BBC, this is back right after World War II. He did a BBC piece on it, and you can find the audio on YouTube. It's really good to listen to. He said, first, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not, in fact, behave in that way. They know of the law of nature, yet they break it. And that's a lot what Romans verse is talking about here, too. You, therefore, have no excuse. You who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. It's interesting, especially if you go to any social site on the internet. Everyone is very quick to point out what everyone else did wrong and demonstrate why with way too many words and way too many explanation points. You did this wrong. You took from me. That was not okay. And yet when we apply it to ourselves, we would sure like a whole lot more grace than we're willing to give. Yeah, but there should be an excuse for it this time, right? But we know there's a law because every one of us can apply it to everyone else. Now, if you look at, Lewis did a study in his book, The Abolition of Man. If you look at different societies, both through time and through present, what you find is they have the very similar foundations. There's not a society, for example, that'll say, it's okay to go out and kill at whim. You won't find that. What you will find is every society will outlaw murder, even a cannibal society. What you'll have in that is you'll have a different exception. Now, we used to talk about this in the law where we would have, in fact, it used to be true here. In the United States, if a husband were to come home and find an act happening that should not be happening, keeping it clean, and he were to murder both his spouse and the other individual in the process of that act, that was what's known as an affirmative defense back in the day. It's not true anymore, just so you know. Not that anyone needs that. It was an affirmative defense, right? That was a different exception. But what was known is still the same foundation, that murder generally was wrong, right? And that's what Lewis found. When he did his study across the different societies and did his study across the current societies, you find the same things with just different tweaks on the edges, not the core. Why did everybody come up with the same thing? If it's a social contract, why did it all come up the same? Now, you could say, well, it's because it's all the prevention of harm. So, I'll read this. This is Romans 2, 14 to 15. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature the things required by the law, they are a law for themselves. Even though they do not have the law, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness. Yeah, we'll hold this. One more. Okay, this is Lewis's book where we've been quoting from. Now, here's the classic example for this. The Nuremberg trials. Nuremberg trials, I think I see most people shaking their heads. You know what this is. Nuremberg, of course, happened after World War II. It's where we tried the Nazi leadership in particular for their war crimes, right? And one of the defenses, in fact, it's Hermann Göring who's in the picture, but one of the defenses that the Nazi leadership provided was we were following orders. We were doing what was a lawful rule inside our country. It had been a law enacted. I was just doing what I was told, right? Now, at the time, we didn't have human rights laws that you could point to and say, yeah, but you violated section 446-483, which says thou shalt not, right? But what we did instead as prosecutors is said, yeah, but you knew better. Well, under what social contract did they know better? Now, you could say there's a global social contract, but under the German one, they didn't. The German law said this was totally okay to torture, kill, and maim people of an entire people group. But you should have known better. Under what law? You know, Lewis says, men have differed as regards to what people, let's read this again. Men have differed as regards what people you ought to be unselfish to, whether it was only your own family, your countrymen, or everyone, but they have always agreed you ought not put yourself first. Another Lewis quote, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? One of the biggest points of the problem of evil is actually this, is when we go to God and we say this isn't right, what standard are we holding up to him? It's the one he made, right? Now, another evidence that goes beyond a social contract is love. And this is not to say that an atheist or unbeliever doesn't truly love people. They absolutely do, but why? And it's behind it is because God enabled us with the capacity to love. When you have someone give up their life for another, it makes no sense within the ideas of evolutionary survival of the fittest for you as an individual to care about the group. That's not what that's about. You care about you inside evolutionary biology. It's you that has to survive. It's you that has to make a difference. Nature does not care about the existence of humanity. Nature doesn't care because nature isn't a thing, right? And its blind processes wouldn't drive us as individuals to care about the group. What it would drive, though, is love would give you to sacrifice for someone else. Love would have you fall on the grenade. Love would have the mom run out in the street and push the child out in front of the bus, even if it cost her life, right? All right, final thoughts. This is a Francis Bacon quote. "It is true that a little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion. For while the mind of man looketh upon second causes scattered, it may sometimes rest in them and go no further. But when it beholdeth the chain of them, confederate and linked together, it must needs fly to providence and deity." I just encourage you with this, whenever you are listening, particularly if you love this stuff and you want to dig in, do unpack what's being said. Because there will be times when you hear something and you go, ooh. And that's great, actually. That's challenging. That's iron sharpening iron. That's important. But do unpack it. Because a lot of times you'll find that underneath it are very simple concepts that may be something you agree with and they may not be. Too many? There we are. Another thing I want to caution is, there's this verse in Matthew 16 where it says, "The Pharisees and the Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. Show us that you're the Christ." When they came to him to talk to him about this, God had already demonstrated the power. When Jesus got baptized, he had the dove come down and the voice come out from heaven in front of a population. "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." He had already healed numerous sick individuals publicly with leprosy. He had cast out demons. He had calmed the storm. He had healed the paralytic. He had raised the dead. He had healed the blind and the mute. He had fed the 5,000. He had fed the 4,000. He had walked on water, among other things. What they really wanted was control. Dawkins has in one of his books this. We're going to see if I can get through all these words. "The God of the Bible is a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully." I was close. I was close. And actually, that's the point, right? How does he really feel? And sometimes, not only do we not want to just control him, we may not like him. And one of the things, too, that's dangerous here is when we talked about the very beginning, and scientists can do this just as easily as we can. If you set your mind to a certain precondition of what it's going to be and you go hunt for that, you can pretty easily slice data and slice things to find what you're looking for. It's very hard to go in with a slate that's willing to follow that evidence wherever it's going to lead. And unfortunately for Dawkins, if this is what he thinks God is like, I wish that we could walk together to see what really was God's nature, both in the Old Testament and now. And this is more of what I was saying. Sometimes a person's problem with God is not so much that he doesn't believe in him, but that he doesn't like him. So we're going to end with this. I think we have enough time. We're just a little bit over. We're going to end with this. It's a video from one of my favorite apologists. And if you get a chance to listen to Dr. John Lennox, he's in his 80s now. He's a brilliant mathematician. He graduated a few years after Hawking from Cambridge. And he is so fabulous when he debates some of the best and the brightest thinkers in atheism. He's brilliant. Because what he's able to do is not only contend with their intellectual challenges in a way that's both concise and eloquent, but he's also able to contend with their heart. And he appeals to that heart. And you'll hear some of that here. I have a number of links to videos after this that are great. Some of them have Lennox, some of them have Lewis, some of them have William Lane Craig. But this guy's fantastic. One thing you'll notice from this is he says, don't answer the question, answer the questioner. You can spend all the time you need, and we should, to be ready to defend the gospel, to be able to explain some of the mysteries of the universe, right? And to be able to tell our friends, this is why I believe what I do. This is why I think God was the foundation of the creation of the earth. And we flew through all of this. You may have plenty of questions, and we could go deep into any one of these things and really get into the nitty-gritty of it. But as he's going to explain, that's not always really what you need to be talking with your friends about. Sometimes it's a heart that goes beyond it. So we can play the clip, and then Russ, after that, we're all set.
Okay, well, let's look at what do you feel is the strongest argument supporting the existence of God? Well, strong for whom? That's an important question. If somebody's coming to me brokenhearted because they've just lost a relative through illness, there's no point in saying, my dear, just look at the fine-tuning of nature. I mean that seriously. I was asked by an atheist professor of philosophy at Oxford to address his students, who he told me were all atheists like him. And he said, we're going to grill you, but I hope you're going to use your strongest argument. Well, I said, if you know what my strongest argument is going to be, you'd better give it to me. So he said, if I'm ever to become a Christian, the argument that would convince me most is fine-tuning. It's strong for some people. Other people don't care sixpence about it. They're not interested in it. They don't understand its power and its force, which is great. People need all kinds of different arguments. Some need an intellectual argument because they're bothered. There's something they don't understand, and they need facts. For example, somebody's bothered about the existence of Jesus. That's very simply dealt with. All you have to do is read a bit of ancient history. Other people are bothered because they are immersed in various aspects of the problem of evil and pain. And you don't deal with that by discussing Genesis 1. Now, I mean that quite seriously. One of the questions here, which I might as well deal with as we're going through, is what's the hardest argument you face? Well, the answer to that's obvious. It's the problem of evil and pain. That is the hardest question any of us face. And we need to think about it, because if we've nothing to say about it, we're as bad as the atheists. They have, by definition, nothing to say. Because atheism is a hopeless philosophy. By definition, there is no ultimate hope. And that's why the Bible talks about it. At the heart of our Christianity is not a set of physical laws. There's a cross. And that is answering a big question. It's telling us, at the very least, that God didn't remain distant from the problem of suffering, but himself has become part of it. That's a very different kind of answer than arguments from nature or the philosophy of science. So there are all kinds of things. It depends who's asking the question. And we need to be sensitive. You see, sometimes, very often I find, you don't answer the question, you answer the questioner. You try to find out where they're coming from, where they're hurting, what the problem is. I never forget first learning this at Cambridge. In college, at dinner, they used to provoke me, of course, because they liked mocking my Irish Christianity. And one night, a chap, but he was a very big chap as far as I remember, and a Christian had asked me to explain why I believed in the resurrection. I was trying to keep my voice down, but of course, the lower I put my voice, the quieter the table became. And suddenly a student thumped the table, and all the spoons and forks jumped. And he said, that's the most preposterous nonsense I've ever heard. How can you believe that rubbish? So I turned around and said, well, I said, you feel really strongly about this. He said, I do. I said, tell me, what did you make of Paul's evidence when you read it? He said, what? I said, well, I presume you feel strongly because you've got an evidence base. Well, did Paul talk about it? I said, come round for coffee. So half an hour later, he said to me, do you know, my parents shoved this stuff down my throat, and I don't want it. And I said, that's the first honest thing you've said to me tonight. Half an hour later, became a Christian. And he has served the Lord for the last 50 years. You see, I got to the real issue. His anger was an outburst against his parents. It had nothing to do with intellectual arguments. So I'm trying to help you see that this question has no single argument.
All right. Can we give Jeff a hand? Now you see why I asked Jeff to teach this class tonight. He's so smart. So Jeff, thank you. Thank you, honestly. Well, wasn't that great? Great. Great stuff. Thank you. Well, as Dr. Lennox was saying, there's no single answer to these things. And so what we're trying to do in this series is approach it intellectually, rationally, objectively, but also from a heart standpoint, because that's where a lot of people are. A lot of people are there. They may not respond at all to some logical, cosmological argument or argument from design or whatever, which we'll talk about next week. Well, those are all great. You need those. But we also need to just hear the heart. And I loved what he shared there. He was hearing the heart of this man and led him to Christ when he heard his heart. So that's what we're trying to do in these testimonials at the end. And several weeks ago, it was during our cornhole tournament out here. I got to talking to one of our newer members here at Broomfield, and they hadn't been here very long, but got to talking to him, and he was just sharing. I said, well, tell me about your life. Tell me about, when did you become a Christian and all this stuff? And he started sharing, and I thought, wow, that's a story that I would love for you to hear more about. And so I asked Jeremiah Martin to come tonight and to share a little bit about his life. Maybe you'd never met Jeremiah yet, hadn't been here too long, I don't think, a couple of months or something like that, Jeremiah. And his wife, Anna, and their little boy, David, marvelous young family. And we had them over for dinner a couple weeks ago, and just a marvelous, marvelous people. So I asked Jeremiah to come share with you tonight. Jeremiah is a cabinet maker. So if you ever need a cabinet, this man can do it. And he's a perfectionist, too, so he will do it right. Okay. Jeremiah, come on up. Well, Jeremiah, you know kind of the basic outline of what I want to talk about, or have you talk about tonight. Talk about kind of your past, where you were, how you came to really give your life over to Jesus fully, and where you are now. I mean, what's Jesus done in your life? Just sharing from your life, okay? And I'll try not to interrupt too much. I'll interject a little bit maybe if I think of something that maybe you've shared with me or a question I have. I'd love to have you speak to, but can you just share with us a little bit about the past and how you got to where you are?
Well, I grew up in a Christian family and was baptized, and I had a really good start. And, I genuinely believed in Jesus. And, I felt like I actually had a real relationship with Jesus. Like an ongoing conversation, when I was a young kid. And
This is how old were you then at that point?
Oh, probably 7 or 8.
Okay, pretty young.
Yeah. And I think that lasted to junior high. And that's when it started to fade, I think. But I mean, I had a vision of what my life should be. And I can see it in my mind's eye. I mean, right.
Even at that young age, at junior high?
Oh,
You
yeah.
had a vision?
Yeah, it was pretty clear.
And what was that? What was that vision?
Well, I just knew that I was to live a very simple, peaceful life, working with my hands. I saw that I had a wife and a boy. Like I actually saw that. Yeah, I mean, I can see it even today, and it always brought me like a very peaceful feeling. But I think, as I got a little older, that relationship started to fade. And I think mostly because I just wanted to fit in, with the cool kids. Acceptance. Not only acceptance from, the world, but like my mom and dad, and I imagined what they expected of me and things like that.
So you were up in maybe high school years then, about
Yeah,
there or so?
yeah,
So your relationship that you had with God and everything just kind of began to fall by the wayside?
yeah. It seems like it faded kind of slowly. I had a good, still do have a good Christian family and mom and dad and the whole deal. I mean, but my dad was very successful, still is, like financially, and so I think I felt like I had to be at least as good as him. And that didn't match my vision. As cabinet makers don't make a lot of money. I mean, even when I give you the price tag for, you might think
Materials
I make a lot
cost
of
a
money,
lot.
but yeah. So, and I knew that. I knew that in high school, that I wasn't going to make a lot of money. Being a craftsman, I needed to make a lot of money to be like my dad. So, my plan was then, I hatched my own plan, is that I was going to live that life, but first I was going to go out and conquer the world, get rich, and then buy my freedom to live the way that I was really
Felt
supposed
like you
to
had to
live.
have those riches, that money in order to be
Yeah.
free?
Yeah.
Is what you're saying?
Well, if you've ever, priced out a wood shop, that's a couple $100,000. So, when you're in high school, you're trying to figure that out. Well, hey, if I'm just going to go for this, I don't even know, like, how am I going to get there? So my plan is to, and my mom and dad wanted this too, you got to go to college, you got to get a degree, like you're just kind of a complete loser, if you don't, if you're not educated. And I don't think they really felt that way, but that's how I took it. So I did, I did get an education, a degree in accounting, of all things. It's like, like I go the exact opposite, and I hated it, of course. I couldn't tell you anything about accounting today. But I did it because I had a plan, and accountants make good money, so.
Is that true? So that was the goal, to make good money so you
Yeah.
could buy the things you need
Sure.
to have the freedom that you wanted.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because I wanted to be, I wanted the approval of my mom and dad and friends and, You know, I wanted to be seen as somebody, you know, like,
Well, did you make it? I mean, did you get that? Did you get the riches and everything that you wanted?
Yeah.
You did. How'd
Yeah.
that happen?
well, so I graduated and I got a job in finance. So
Didn't know anything about accounting, but you got a job in finance.
in finance, yeah, selling leasing and finance products for big trucks. Neither of which I care about. You know, I don't care about trucking or accounting or finance or any of it, but
But it was money. It was money.
it was good money. And I hated it. Like I made it like a year. It was just a fish out of water, you know. I'm not a salesman. I've always been a real quiet guy who just likes to, I'm creative. I just like to spend a lot of time by myself, and that world is like not like that at all. So the next thing I did was, maybe a compromise. I thought, well, I'll compromise. I know I can't do that, but I had already been, I've been in carpentry, all along. That's how I paid my way through college. I had my own business going already, and so I went into general contracting, and that worked really well, actually. But to make the kind of money that I was needing to make, I had to, have several jobs going at the same time, and managing people, and that's never been me. I'm just not really put together that way. I like to do the work myself. Like that gives me joy and satisfaction, and so it was a decent compromise because I was still creating things, and that worked a little longer. Maybe 7 years, I think I did that, and I did. I made a lot of money, and I was miserable.
Wait. You made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that was to gain the freedom, but you were miserable.
Yeah, I got my college degree and had a nice house, nice cars, was going on vacations, and it was horrible.
You had the American dream, okay?
Yeah.
You had nice cars. You were telling me that like a new truck every year, I think you said.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And all this stuff, I mean, thousands of dollars, but you were miserable.
Yeah, because it never seemed like enough. So I have a goal to make, X amount this year, and then I got there, and it was like an empty feeling, because then, like, all right, well, next year I got to do more. I bought this truck this year. It's super nice. Well, next year had to be a bigger one.
Why more, Jeremiah? What was driving that?
I don't know. That
Did you think that having more would satisfy that emptiness, maybe?
must be, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Looking at it now, it seems a little crazy.
So what happened? What made when you began to turn to come to where you are now? What happened there?
I just felt empty. God was not a part of my life at all at the time either. I don't think I ever disbelieved, and I wasn't like an atheist. I just, like I knew consciously knew what I was doing. I was consciously going against the will of God for my life. And I kind of wanted to put God in the closet. So I didn't want to really be accountable for that. So I just paid no attention. But that doesn't work very well for very long. Because, at first it seemed okay. The first couple of years were pretty good, actually. It was exciting, because I felt like I was on track to be like my dad and all that. But, then it just, like I had to, like there wasn't like natural energy. I don't know, like I had to manufacture it all the time, like coffee and lots of coffee and chewing tobacco, and I was addicted to all kinds of stuff. Just they were like little aids to keep me going.
He's trying to find some fulfillment somehow, right?
Yeah.
Some meaning.
Yeah, and you can never get enough of that stuff either. Like there's never enough. And then the more you do it, the more you need. It's just never enough. So
You know who this sounds like, right? In the
that?
Bible?
Oh, yeah. Well, right, yeah.
Yeah. Solomon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ecclesiastes, right? Yeah. Had everything,
Yeah.
and yet it was all just meaningless, vanity, chasing after the wind.
Yeah, so, around, I was just running out of gas, living that way. And this was around 2008. So I'm in the construction business, so, the housing market collapsed. And, overnight, my phone just stopped ringing for a long time. So that was a huge blessing, actually, because it gave me an excuse to just rethink some things, and I did. So I went from working like 6-7 days a week, 100 hours a week sometimes, and I didn't work for like 2 years. I had
Because the work wasn't there, or we can't?
well, that
Just
initially, but then I wanted some space, and I had enough resources to do that at that time, which is good, I guess. So I just turned it off completely. When I do things, I go all the way. Like it's either all or nothing. So I went.
Say he'll build you a good cabinet.
So I went from all to absolutely nothing, and then I went on a spiritual seeking path.
Tell us about that.
So, at first, I married along the way too. She was not a believer. I married her, I'm sure, for all the wrong reasons. And she was very much not a believer. So at first, she was okay with my seeking as long as it was, not like Jesus.
You could seek everything else but Jesus?
Right,
Oh.
right. So, at first it was like, the New Age type of stuff. And, that didn't last very long because, honestly, to me, it just seemed like asking the universe for stuff. And
It sounds funny, doesn't it? But yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I already had stuff.
We're laughing with you.
Yeah. and honestly, a lot of stuff is big burden too, because then you got to have insurance for it, and you got to have it registered, and it's like all these little dependents out there that you got to take care of. It's not what I imagined it would be. But so then I went to more sophisticated things like Buddhism and
Okay. Looking at Eastern religions,
Yeah.
things like that, trying to find.
yeah, and I mean that was more interesting for sure.
All this while you knew about Jesus, so
Yeah.
right, but you weren't going there yet.
He was pulling at me.
Okay.
Yeah, he was pulling at me because the more I read, I kept I was realizing that this sounds a lot of it sounds an awful lot like the Bible.
So
I mean,
the
there's a
things you were
lot of-
reading and studying,
Sure.
you realized that's in the Bible.
Yeah. So, that really got pulling on me. And so, that turned into philosophy. And then I started reading the great books of the Western world. And
Like philosophers, like
yeah, like Francis Bacon is, I don't know, there's like 50 or something.
okay.
I don't know that I read all 50, but I on the list was St. Augustine. So I never read anything like that because it felt like I was reading about myself. And this was a guy.
Yeah, he was there. He was a lot like what you were experiencing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's like 4th century or something. And like, wow, this 1,500 years later, like I'm feeling the same way that this guy felt. I don't know that. I think that's when it really changed my life. Like I related so much to what to what he related, including the delay. You keep pushing off Jesus, even though he's pulling at you hard.
Push him away until you
But,
just
yeah.
can't push him away anymore. Right?
Yeah, because I was afraid. I knew I would lose my marriage. I knew.
She wouldn't stay with you if you turned to Jesus. She would.
Well, that's what I was afraid of,
Okay. All right.
and I was right. I was right to be afraid of that. And I lost other relationships too. And I knew that. So I think I delayed, really giving myself to Jesus for years because of that.
You had a lot to lose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I took my marriage seriously. I mean, I did everything I could too to convince her, but like just like I feared, it happened just that way, because eventually I knew, like the Buddha, he said, if you follow my eightfold path and you do everything, you master all these things, then you might be enlightened like me, maybe in 100 lifetimes or
Yeah.
so. And compared to Jesus, who, well, he just did it all for you, and he said, it's finished, and you believe in me, and you have eternal life. I'm not patient enough for the Buddha. It's not
Don't
a
you
very,
love cabinet makers?
it's just not a very good deal. I mean, Jesus has a better deal.
I love one thing you told me once. You said that you realized that everything Jesus said was true.
Well, yeah.
Right? You saw that.
Well, I started, yeah. Yeah, somewhere along the line, I started to test these things and really pay attention to the results that I got. And, I was consciously paying attention. Are these things true? And I haven't found anything that hasn't been proven true in my life that Jesus said.
And you were really checking it out. I mean, you were coming from a very dark place in your life at that point, a very low point, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you were trying to find hope and meaning.
Yeah.
And you couldn't find it in Buddha or Confucius or
Yeah, I mean,
philosophers.
it was all interesting. But it just, like, it started with one question, turns into 10 questions, turns into 1,000 questions. Like, it's insatiable. It's like any other, it's kind of, to me, it felt like any other addiction that I've ever had, You can't get enough of what you don't need.
That's deep. That's deep. Okay.
So,
tell us about what you're realizing all this about Jesus. Did there come a point where you just said, Jesus,
Yeah.
I'm coming to you?
yeah. Yeah. I'd made a definite decision. Yeah, absolutely.
To return to
Yeah.
Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to put all my cards in with Jesus.
Everything. Just lay it all down for
Yeah.
him. Okay.
And, the decision was right away. How it unfolded, it took, another, it's still unfolding.
Still unfolding.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a journey. Yeah.
The decision was right away. And, just like I thought, I lost relationships and my wife. That was difficult. But, on the other side of that is, came everything that I imagined when I was a little boy. I met my wife. We have a little boy. Somewhere along the line too, I decided, I'm going to do what I feel like God meant me to do, to be a professional woodworker, full time, not a contractor, but to build cabinets, furniture, and I did that.
It's interesting. You went through all of that as you went
Yeah.
through, and God brought you right around to where you envisioned as a.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, by the time I got there, I had spent all my money that I made, because divorces are expensive, and not working, So I had, when I decided to do that, I had no money, but somehow it all worked out. The thing that I feared was handled when I gave it over.
Oh, that's important. That's important. The thing you feared most, God took care of
Yeah.
and you gave it to him. Yeah.
But I stopped hatching my own plans. I just gave up on thinking, basically. No, really.
I know what you mean. Okay. You just turned it over to God.
Yeah.
And you simplified your life so much, it seems like.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I feel it suits me now. I feel comfortable in my life because I'm not swimming upstream all the time. God's plan for me actually works pretty well.
You're not worried about how much money you have to make or anything, or driving the newest truck, or
No, I've had the same truck now for like 15 years, and I'm perfectly happy with it.
that's great. That's great.
I mean, the things that I used to want, I don't even like it's not even there anymore. That's the strange thing, is all these things, it didn't happen overnight, but they've all fallen off, like on their own, not by my effort either. It's not like my willpower.
It's like when you seek first the kingdom of God, then you don't need to worry about all that other stuff,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Sounds biblical almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, that's worked out to be true too.
And it's true. You've seen the truth of that. So you
Yeah.
don't have to worry. He tells me he sleeps soundly at night,
Oh yeah,
doesn't worry. He even gave up coffee.
yeah.
I knew
That was last.
Not that
year.
it was sinful, but you were.
That was
I did-
last year, and the thought came into my mind, and that hey, you need to think about quitting coffee. And at first, I was like, "No, you get behind me, Satan. That's an evil thought."
I think that's what I would think, Cal.
But
Not that coffee's sinful, but you just
No.
didn't need that anymore, right?
no, not that coffee's evil or bad or anything like that. I don't think that. But I just had an attachment to it. Like I needed it to survive. I thought. And I think, that was just one more thing that God was trying to show me. Like, you don't have to rely on anything out there. You can be free from all of it. And
That freedom that you were looking for, that
Mhm.
you thought giving all these riches would gain you, you found in giving up all those things and coming to Christ.
yeah,
He became that freedom that you longed for.
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah. Yeah, and I always had a hard time sleeping because I had all my own plans that I'm trying to think through and figure out, and now I don't think about it, and I sleep great. I don't know if I would recommend this to anyone but I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, and I live my life that way.
Really, just a day at a time. Today. And,
Yeah,
oh,
and I ask God in the morning, like, what are we doing today? And the more I live that way, the more peace that I live with, the better I sleep. It's not like all my problems went away or anything, but it's like, I don't worry about facing them like I used to, because I know that the answer will be there. Because I first started testing this, early on, asking God for what I needed, and just I'm pretty much self-taught cabinet maker, so a lot of times I take on a job not knowing how to do the job, and then I'm in the spot where I better learn. And so I would just ask, I would pray, show me how to do this. And it's never not worked. Even simple things like, where did I put that tool? And I'm serious. Like, if I worry, if I'm thinking, all right, where did I set it down? Where was I last? That doesn't work. If I just stop, breathe,
wait on God.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just ask, would you please show me where that's at?
Quiet your mind,
Yeah.
quiet your heart.
And
allows you.
and let it go and go about my business. Like, this is like 100%. It works 100% of the time. Within a few minutes, my eyes will fall right on it.
Wow. I'm going to try that. Next time I lose my keys. Jeremy, we're going to have to quit, Jeremiah, but this is the lessons of a cabinet maker. Isn't this awesome? I mean, all of us long to have the kind of peace, just a, I don't know, just a sense of freedom, well-being, freedom from stuff, freedom from worries, all that you seem to exude. And I've been around you a while and a little bit, and talking, and you just exude that kind of peace. And I just love that. It's a lesson for me. Appreciate it. Thank you. Anything else you want to share?
You can trust him. It works. I didn't always think that. Like I thought that I had to do it my own self. Like my effort. And that's not true.
It was like you were God. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not true. I don't need to be smart. I don't need to be educated. I don't need to have a lot of money. Like I really can rely on God. And God really does come through with everything that I really need.
Amen. Amen. And God, we are so grateful for Jeremiah and Anna and David and how you brought them into our lives here at church and just blessed us in so many ways, blessed me in so many ways. I just love listening to him and the wisdom that flows out of him because he's just turned his life over to you, God, and trusts you with everything. And I love what he just said, that you are trustworthy. We can trust you. This works. It really does. It brings us the meaning and the joy and the hope, the peace in life that we all long for. We all need that. And it's not found in stuff. It's not found in this world. It's found in you, Lord. And I just praise you for Jeremiah and his family and how they demonstrate that. And thank you for him teaching us tonight and sharing this part of his life. What a blessing that is. And may we walk out of here just recommitted to seek you with all of our heart, all our soul, all our mind, our strength. Love you with everything within us. Turn our lives over to you. Don't worry about tomorrow or anything else. Just trust you, God. And thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for being a God we can trust, who loves us so deeply that you give up everything for us. Thank you. God bless Jeremiah and bless him in so many ways. And thank you for him, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.